Hello. So in my last discussion, I left off with speaking about how now my sister and myself had to spend more time around my mother. And so prior to this point, I really did not have much experience with the personality of my mother, nor did I really know what was going on in her life or anything like that. So, um, the first time we go and see my mother, I think uh, for me, in 3 years, I am acquainted with my little brother. And so I and my sister were not aware of the fact that my mother had another child. In fact, my grandmother knew. She was there at the birth of my younger brother, but my sister and myself were not. So this was, and my grandmother didn't tell us that our mother had another child. So this was a shock to both of us. And you can imagine that with all the calamity going on in my home life and the disappearance of my grandfather, my mindset and attitude is now trying to search for a relational, familial space because, from my perceptual standpoint, my family's gone now. My grandfather, though I didn't speak a lot about him, was really the person. So my grandmother was most instrumental in influencing my personality from a very direct way, but implicitly, I would follow my grandfather around. I would mimic and imitate him, not really consciously always, but sometimes consciously. And he's who I napped with. He's who I played around with. He's who I wrestled with and who I leg rode on. I would grab onto his leg and he would drag me and run all around the house with me holding onto his leg, which I liked as a kid because it allowed me to see the house move in a relativistic fashion. I didn't know, I neither did I know I was going to be a physicist or be interested in physics at this time, but I always thought it was interesting that when I was on his leg and he was moving fast, that the objects looked different in the space than they did when I was standing still. And it looked like the house was moving versus myself moving, especially when it went really fast. And so, I mean, I liked those things. I liked my perception being messed with. And I liked the fact that I could be close to him and things like that. And I didn't really like being held, but I did like holding his hand when I crossed the street and things like that. So a major source of affection and attention disappeared in my life. So I, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, I was searching for that same affection and attention. And so I know this is my mother and everything like that. So I'm hoping my mother will be my mother. So I then begin, and my sister at the same time. It was a fantasy that was actively going on in our imagination, though we didn't exchange these ideas with one another. We started fantasizing about living with our mother, and that was the most sort of exciting anticipatory action of going over there when our grandmother told us we were going to go stay over at our mother's for a little while she was at work, and she would come and pick us up. She drove us, and my mother lived on the southwest side of town of Houston, and so when we lived on, well, we lived near Acres Home. So when we were not in the suburbs, we lived near Acres Home. There's a few suburban areas in Houston where Acres Home is more rural, so it's not as suburban. It's a rural community, but South Park, Acres Home, Autometa, these areas are not exactly light on crime, so they actually have high crime rates. And similarly, southwest side of Houston, closer to Katy area, but not quite, closer to Herman Memorial, I don't know if anybody's familiar with that area, but that side of Houston, crime, 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 crime. And so that's where my mother lived in an apartment complex. And so our grandmother would take us over there. She'd drop us off, and then she'd leave. So we go over there, and so surprise, I have a little brother now, and he's a baby, and he's crawling around and everything like that. And my sister and I are both shocked. My sister's happy about this to a certain extent, At least she doesn't have not if she doesn't have all positive emotions about the situation. She's not visibly upset. Me, I'm visibly upset because what the hell? So, because to me, TI works like this: I'm a child, he's a child, I'm your child, my sister's your child, he's your child, he gets to live with you, I and my sister don't. Why is this the case? And nothing I could reason out at that age, having the crude reasoning I have. So that's the thing, your reasoning changes. Even though I have the IQ and things like that to reason as a kid, even at that age, I was always reasoning about things and try to reason about whatever it was I was experiencing, especially if it emotionally bothered me or upset me. If I was excited about something, I had to contemplate and think about it. If I was happy about something, I had to contemplate and think about it. If I was pissed off, I had to contemplate and think about it. That was a deal with me. So I was pissed off. I was peeved at having a little brother. Not because necessarily I had a little brother, but because I thought this is absolutely horseshit unfair. I was pissed off because this was utterly unfair. And so my mother was not too happy about my I don't know if I exactly directly expressed my ideas and my feelings right then and there, but she could tell I was not having a good time, and she was getting on me about having a bad attitude and things like that. But whenever you cross me, you've crossed me at that point in time in my life. At that point in time in my life, you crossed me, you crossed me. I'm not gonna just change quickly, at the very least. Though I did change because I was trying to appeal to my mother. It took me a few minutes, but I eventually turned over and I tried to play with my little brother and things like that, but I did not like him. Did not like him. And so but more so than that, if you think I had problems with my mother, man, my grandmother, as the conscientious person she is, also being very Christian. So there are a few things that come with my grandmother. One, you do not do cohabitation. You only live with someone if you're married with them. You do not have children out of wedlock. My grandmother never did that. No, no, no. Sex and children are for marriage. And you do not make your responsibilities someone else's responsibilities, which my grandmother is raising her two children, and she's had another one, which I irked the shit out of my grandmother. Irked her very much so. And she's not taking these two children. So that's something that really, 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 really bothered my grandmother. Because my grandmother, from a pragmatic standpoint too, her financial situation is not good. She has to work two jobs that she's overqualified for, but because my grandmother's older and it's a recession period, my grandmother's 50 now, software companies do not want to rehire her because her experience at Compaq and her age made it such that the amount of money that they would have to pay her, and she wasn't young, and she would have, I guess, the way she explained it, not being young, having too much experience, disqualified her from the jobs that she wanted, especially because people weren't really hiring that much in that sector of things in Houston at the time. So it's temporally local. That's what I have to say about this situation. So she was feeling the strain of that. She worked at Diamond Shamrock, which is a gas station, and I don't think it's Payless, but it was some kind of retail store too. But she hated both of those jobs, very, 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 very much so. But she was at first picking us up from school when she was working, and having us sleep in the car while she worked at nights at Diamond Shamrock, because she worked overnight. She worked during the day at the retail store, worked overnight at the gas station late nights, and so we would stay in the car. But this was starting to affect our grades and things like that, so she started to figure out a different situation, so that's why we're with our mother. Now, you'd think this thing stays stable, but my mother is also very opinionated. So she's a very opinionated person. My grandmother is a very disagreeable person. My mother is a very opinionated person. They're not necessarily the same thing. So my grandmother may not always share her opinion with you, but she will judge you internally and distance herself from you, sometimes vocally judge you or yell at you, but it's not always something about this opinionated standpoint. For my grandmother, it's more about her moral principles that will not be compromised, and you will not tread on those moral principles or traditions, which is why I'm pretty sure my grandmother is an ISTJ. So my grandmother is an ISTJ, mind you, and I'm pretty sure my mother is an ISFP. And so my mother is extremely opinionated. Maybe actually my mother is an ESFP. Extremely opinionated and vocal with her opinions and everything like that, and doesn't really think about the practical long-term consequences of things. And so my grandmother, however, is very, very, very pragmatic and is thinking, I'm 6, so I'm 6, so I think my little brother is 2, but he still crawls around, which surprised me. I thought my brother was a lot younger than he was, because by the time, so one thing that you have to know about me too, which is a problem with how I was whenever I was a kid, was that I judged people based on myself, which was not a good thing. That was actually not a good thing, because that actually got me into trouble with my mother, because I didn't think that there was a difference. I didn't believe in differences in people per se. So, especially not siblings or anything like that. So I didn't watch my sister develop or anything like that, but I was watching my little brother develop, and I know he was not moving as fast as I was. So I thought that there was something wrong with him, because that's just not what was going on with me. That was not a good I can tell you that was not a good thing. And that's not, and I didn't, and so you don't know personally that you have ability and things like that. Other people do, and that's actually going to make them feel very, very bad whenever it's the case that you start pointing out differences. But you're not pointing out differences because you think those differences mean something. You're just actually curious about those differences because you just know that that's not the experience that you had. Because by the time I was 2 years old, I was very, 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 very different. I didn't wear pull-ups or anything like that, and I didn't crawl or anything like that. My grandmother, in fact, tried to put Pampers on me when I was 9 months old, and I was very, very adamant about the fact that I was not going to wear Pampers. Pampers are for babies, and Joshua's a big boy, and he's going to wear underwear. And my grandmother was very taken back by my by my vehement distaste for the infantile nature of pull-ups, because I guess by the time I was able to watch TV or something like that, I associated pull-ups, which are not Pampers, but they're basically like the in-between Pampers. They're training wheels. I was determined to become potty trained, and I became potty trained, which my grandmother was actually very proud of this fact that I worked to become potty trained by the time I was 9 months old. She was very proud about that. She would brag about that all to her friends all the time, that, well, Joshua was potty trained by the time he was 9 months old, and Joshua doesn't wear pull-ups. He wears underwear and things like that, and I always wore underwear and things like that. Sometimes, yeah, well, anyways, like, so that was a thing, you know. But, you know, it takes a while for you to learn to control your bladder, so sometimes, yeah, it was the case that I leaked things like that, which my grandmother was not too happy about.
she would actually bring my attention to the stains in my underwear at times because, well, you're a child, you're not very mindful, and she does not like this and cleaning this and things like that. So when I'm looking at my little brother, by this time I'm 6 years old, I don't have those problems, but I did have things like that. So, but so I'm looking at my little brother, and I'm just like, what's going on here? Something's not right. And so, not only not liking the situation because I think it's royally unfair, but also just wondering what's going on with this kid, sort of deal. And so that didn't actually go over well. So my mother was a bit peeved by my sister and myself being over there in the first place. She felt a bit put on, especially because of my attitude and the way in which I was treating my little brother and things like that, and the questions I was asking and the way I was going about things weren't exactly the most ingratiating because, well, I don't know my mom. One, I don't know the situation. Two, I'm actually very vocal about my confusion and my questioning because that's something my grandmother endorsed. I thought I could be as honest with my mother as I could be with my grandmother, which was the wrong assumption. And so by the time my grandmother arrives, my mother has a few words for her about myself and I don't think it was about my sister. It was just mostly about myself because Joshua does is. So my grandmother socialized me and everything like that, but my grandmother socialized me around her friends. So her friends very much so. So this is also why I became articulate because I didn't actually talk a lot whenever I was a kid. It was a case that when people found out I could talk, they would want me to talk more. And whenever it was the case that I presented interesting opinions, because I don't think every kid remembered everything that they saw on National Geographic or PBS or something like that, or was as interested in asking people questions about things, like I was always a very much a question based kid. So kids are curious and things like that. But when I'm telling you, it's a curiosity to level, to curiosity to another level. And so people encouraged my interest in figuring things out. That was something my grandmother's friends and she fostered. Whenever it didn't get, whenever it wasn't the case that it was too inconvenient for her, because sometimes she, especially with words, get the dictionary. Because my grandmother was the type of person like, look, I'm busy. If she's busy, don't bother her. That was the whole deal. So ISTJ straight up. So so that's how it was. And so sometimes my curiosity got on her nerves, and that's also why she was very adamant on my reading and doing other things because my curiosity would be a bother to her need to get things done. She was a very much so a need to get things done, take care of things sort of person. So that kind of musing and stuff like that did bother her at times. But it really bothered my mom because there are implications to what I was saying that I wasn't aware of because I was a little kid. So, so yeah, and so and I also didn't know that she had a boyfriend who was her longtime fiance sort of deal kind of thing because I had met him, he was at work and everything like that, and I didn't know or anything like that. And so my grandmother, my mom has some words for my grandmother about my behavior and things like that. So my grandmother works like this: I'm taking care of your kids. So one, no, so that was just an insult to my grandmother. You don't, so my grandmother did not feel like my mother was in a position to criticize my attitudes or my behaviors, especially not to her. And yeah, so no, so she didn't feel like my mother is also relatively more cavalier and things like that. My grandmother did not appreciate that, so they got into an argument, and so that was the first time I saw my mother in a while, and that was the last time I saw my mother for about I would say probably 2 years, and so that was my first encounter with my mother, and so first encounter with my mother that I can remember, and she wasn't exactly like a bad person or anything like that, but my mom wasn't exactly very motherly either, so she wasn't super nurturing or anything like that either. And she didn't seem so she wasn't a helicopter parent like my grandmother. My grandmother, even though she's very conscientious and tough minded at times, she's extremely nice and she's very attentive to in both ways, whether it's for your safety or for affection and things like that. Because my grandmother played with us and things like that. She was affectionate and everything like that. And she was always looking out for our needs. So that was a big deal to my grandmother. Because there were times where we did not eat. If it was between us and her, she always picked us, which that spoke a lot to me about my grandmother. I respect her a lot. And so my mother, not exactly like that. There was a few times where it seemed like my mom was a bit disinterested and my sister and myself and my little brother, which I took note of. So that was all shocking. So, and not shocking, but it was all different. So there was differences. But I mused and I thought about my mother a lot because I wanted still at that point in time, I wanted nothing more than to live with my mother. And that kind of bothered my grandmother because I just started asking her questions all the time about my mother and everything like that. And so you can imagine we're at school and everything like that. My performance at school started sinking because if it were the case that I thought that school was dumb and I was happy, then at least I can just be brilliant and things like that and just give the people what they want and whatever, and I'm leaving out of this place. I'm gonna go to Astroworld or have a Sunday or go hang out with my grandfather or play with my grandmother, play in my big backyard or something like that, and just read and watch PBS and things like that. I don't care, it's like school's whatever it is. I don't have any emotional stock and investment. I know I don't like the thing, but it doesn't bother me that much either because apparently I'm good at this thing and uh, everything else is fine in my life. So it's just like a necessary evil. That changed, however. that changed, however, whenever the divorce happened. And it was very noticeable to my teachers. So they became very worried. And so teachers, they talk and communicate to parents and things like that. So this worry of my teachers got transferred to my grandmother. And my grandmother does not exactly take people calling her about me and things like that well because that's something of her reputation. And so she was not too happy about this. And so I started getting spankings and things like that for whenever so I didn't get spankings very much, but now I started getting spankings a lot because my grades would drop and I would also get into trouble for not paying attention. Not really talking out and things like that. I wasn't like that kind of kid or anything, but I would just walk out of class at times. Not pay attention and various things like that. More introverted showing out sort of deals, but that doesn't mean I didn't become vocal at some point in time because at one point in time I decided to just let a teacher verbally have it. And that got me into a lot of trouble. It was the first time I got written up, so I got a write up. I actually got in trouble, which was a shock to other people and a shock to me. But that's where it started. Like that's when it started. A red note, and all the kids are like, "Ooh, you got a red note" and everything like that. And I thought kids are stupid. like, I mean, like, but I was ooh, I got a red note because I knew that one, my grandmother should not know about this or see this because if she sees this, I'm fucking screwed. I've gotten spankings for less than this. Like, I'm not stupid. like, so that's my problem. I'm not stupid. so, like, that's my problem. That was always my problem whenever I was younger. I'm not stupid. There are plenty of times where I wish I was just a dumb little kid, man. But I wasn't. So I thought, fuck, man. Like, what am I gonna do about this? At the same time, I did not know that they were gonna. So I knew that they call home and things like that. I'm not gonna lie. I knew that they called home, but every time they called home, I was in the office. I was present there and everything like that. So this didn't happen. I got the red note and everything like that. Nobody did a phone call or anything like that. So this situation didn't seem like one where they're going to call home. So I hit the thing, like it disappeared. And so I should have known because I'm very perceptive. So that's one of the things I can say. So I come home, like my sister is told to go to her room, which is like we come home same time and everything like that because we have to take the bus now. Because my grandmother, oh god, I tell you, man, like when I had to start taking the bus and I started being around other kids, like my grandmother's not picking me up, my grandfather's not picking me up, it was this fucking like deal. Like you can imagine being an introverted kid and now you're just thrown into the situation with all these other wild ass kids and things like that. With this, freaking obnoxious bus driver. Whatever. Anyways, so yeah, so that was the deal. So that also changed. So so Man, so yeah, so she tells my sister to go to her room. So I know, something's up. Josh, do you have anything you want to tell me? Like, oh, what do you, like, no, nothing really. How's your day at school today? And everything like that. I just thought, man, like, I just did not want to give up the ghost. And so it eventually comes out that, yeah, so she knows I got written up for mouthing off to my teacher and everything like that. And and everything like that. So she knows, like, my grandma's not stupid. And she asked me, "You think I'm stupid?" I'm like, "No, I don't think you're stupid. I just didn't believe that they would actually call the house." So, like, and I said that. I shouldn't have said that. So, yeah. So, anyways, I get spanking and everything like that. And so, my grandmother also feels kind of guilty whenever she spanks me. And so, she always has to talk to me afterwards and everything like that about why it happened and everything like that. And she doesn't like doing it, but you can't do this. And what would Jesus think and everything like that. Christian guilt just on me, like, it's very really, so I'm not happy. Like, so I'm not happy. I'm not happy. And I mean, and it's at this point in time where I start thinking, wow, man, like, why is life so dang temporal? There is no consistency in anything, not really. So and I guess I'd put it like this: reality versus expectations. So this is really, 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 really where I started becoming aware of the difference between reality versus expectation, because I expected my mother to be like my grandmother. One thing I realized very quickly is my mother is not my grandmother. My grandmother is far more nurturing, but I assumed that my mother would be equally, if not more, nurturing because she was my mother. And my grandmother is extremely nurturing towards me, and she's not my mother, so I ran the logic that this is my mom, so my mom would be much more affectionate and nurturing towards me than she actually was, which was not the case, which really, really, really threw, like, it just threw me. Then, too, also the case that my brother is my brother. He's my little brother. There shouldn't be any difference really between us because, as far as I can tell with my sister, like, yeah, so maybe it was a case that I had more ability than my sister per se, but my sister is not dumb, and she's actually very bright, and she has a better memory than I do. So I'll put it like that. My sister has her own strong points. We're strong. We have different strong suits. So whatever my cognitive abilities are and strong suits are, they're not the same ones as my sister. Maybe my sister doesn't have as much as me, but she's not less than me. Not any noticeable. And there's things that she's definitely better at than I am, which I noticed, and she was quick to show. So, it was like, not, we were equals to me. There was nothing, like, there was no discrepancy. So I thought my sister was my sister, like, because she was my sister. So as far as I can tell, my sister, like, it makes sense for congruently, it fit, the pieces fit, everything was nice, neat, and fitted in the context of my little framework of reasoning. Then I meet my little brother. And things don't fit because this one here is not quite as fast as my sister and myself. Like, that's not happening. And it doesn't mean that, like, my little brother isn't nice or anything like that, that he didn't have his own personality and that I don't love my little brother or anything like that. But it was the case that, and he doesn't look like my sister or myself, which also threw me for a loop because I could tell I look like my mom to a certain extent. I also look like whoever else is my parent. And I can tell my sister looks like my mom and whoever else is her parent because we don't look just one to one like our mother. But we can tell, well, I can tell we look like her. Who our little brother looked like had to be his dad because he didn't look like our mom. So I'm much more, well, so anyways, so like my little brother didn't look like me necessarily, and he didn't look like my sister from a pure physiological standpoint. So that's all I'm saying. Like, I hope these things don't make it sound like I'm a shallow person or something like that. I was thinking these things as a very small child. I'm trying to figure out why things don't fit with what I expected. And so those are some of the first things I noticed because that's what you notice as a kid. I don't know anything about genes per se. I didn't learn about evolutionary theory until I was 8 years old. So, and I didn't buy it then because, well, I didn't know really. So I'm gonna get to evolution and everything like that. There's gonna be problems in my life because of things. So, anyways, so like, okay, anyways, so yeah, anyways, so I meet my little brother. So yeah, anyways, hey, anyways, I meet my little brother, and so there's all these discrepancies. And then I start to notice things too where it's just like, well, these squirrels, I just noticed there's not the. So there are meerkats in Africa. I knew about meerkats in Africa. I knew. At this point in time, I'm learning a lot of different information. And the first principle that I arrive at is that there's a difference between reality and expectations. Whatever you expect and why you expect things, they don't necessarily make sense. And I'm not kidding. I start thinking they don't necessarily make sense. And because I picked they don't necessarily make sense because I couldn't figure out why I thought that in the first place. That was the number one thing that I was trying to figure out. Because look, whenever people tell you you're smart and things like that, you don't want to believe that you can make. You don't want it to be the case that you're wrong. I put it like that. At least I think that that's why that was like that for me or something like that, because there was no other situations really. So I was learning. I was experiencing more in the world. I was finding out wrong on so many levels about so many things, which I didn't expect. But I really learned quickly that, well, why didn't I expect that? Or why did I think these things? It's not why didn't I expect it. Why did I think these things to begin with? Like, and I was asking my sister, and she was like, "Go somewhere, man." Like, it's like, because my sister is an INFP. She's just like, whatever, man. Like, leave me alone. Like with that stuff. So at least at the time, she was little, and she was very stressed and things like that. We were all stressed and bothered. So my little pontificating self was getting on people's nerves to some extent. This is also why I learned you think by yourself. You don't go, you don't go taking these things everywhere. Because I used to just walk around the house and things like that, like a little Socrates. I spent time in my room. I spent time in my sister's room. I spent time in the living room. I spent time in my grandma's room. I spent time in the backyard. I just walked around musing and things like that, and asking people questions occasionally whenever something struck me, or messing with this or that. So I got in a lot of trouble for messing with things, but I was that kind of kid. So, anyways, but I learned I need to stay in my room, and I need to walk around the tree in the backyard and think about these things because like they're bothering me, and that's something that's true about me. So I don't know if it's the case that I think about things because I can't ever let anything go. So it can't actually just disappear. Even when I don't want to, it always like comes back, plagues me, haunts me. Especially if I don't come up with I have to find some kind of reason for it because if I don't, I'm going insane. So it's the case that, and I think a lot of people are like that. I just think I'm like that with everything. So I think a lot of people are like that about certain things. I'm just like that with everything. So I really think that that's the difference. And so that's thinking for me. And so that's really what I noticed. So that there's something wrong with my expectations as a person. Now, my reason for this was I attributed it to sin. That was the conclusion I came up with. I attributed it to sin because it made sense to me that after the